Across the country, people are marking the second annual National Day of Truth and Reconciliation through ceremony, song, and reflection. We have lots of coverage ahead on this commemorative day as the country confronts the tragic history of Canada's residential school system. Now, it's fair to say progress has been made, but equally fair to say there is more work to do. The National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, RoseAnne Archibald, is here with me in studio. National Chief Archibald, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you. It's good to be here, David.
I suspect this has been quite a busy day for you. I wonder, what are your reflections on a day like this?
Today is really about survivors, especially those children that went to those institutions, who survived, who suffered, and also for the children and little ones who actually didn't make it home and died in those institutions. As you know, I don't call them schools anymore. Mm-hmm. I call them what they were, institutions of assimilation and genocide. And so it's a somber day. And my hope is over time that these days will become more hopeful as we walk through the reconciliation process together. But there has to be truth before reconciliation. And the truth is that genocide happened here on Turtle Island, now known as Canada. And once we begin to acknowledge that truth, then we can really begin to heal, all of us, not just Indigenous First Nations people, but non-Indigenous people as well.
Do you think people are not acknowledging that truth? I mean, help me understand exactly what you mean by that. Like, there does seem to be a broader understanding of what happened and the wrongness of it. What's missing from getting to truth as you see it?
It has to be in the education system, for example. And so people call it a dark part of our history, but it really is genocide. Mm-hmm. And if we don't use that word and acknowledge the devastation of those institutions and the damage that colonialism has done to First Nations people, then we really can't begin to embrace the solutions of how we're going to heal together, because this is ultimately about building that healing path forward, I always say. And we all need it. It's not just for Indigenous people who suffered in those institutions. It's for people like you. Mm-hmm. It's for people who have a sense of like, oh, I didn't know that about Canada. You know, Canada's always been this kind of happy, oh gosh, golly gee, I'm sorry place. But you know, there's another part of Canada that we have to acknowledge and heal and move forward from.
No, you're dead right. Like, I was taught none of this growing up in school, right? I learned about this as a grown-up, and, you know, there is progress. My boys went to school today. They're learning about it in school today. They're talking about it in school today. But I just wonder, when you look at the big picture of where we are, this is the second day as a national day for this. Where do you think we are as a country in terms of, like, making that progress on the truth and reconciliation recommendations? Where do you think we are in Canada right now?
We're definitely at the beginning. We're, you know, this is just the second year that this day has occurred, and it's going to be a day that will be here for as long as Canada is a country. And so we are at the very beginning. Even if you look at the calls to action, the TRC report, there are 94 calls to action, and only 16 of them have been fully completed. And so I've said to other journalists, at the rate we're going, that would be 40 years before we finish all of those calls to action, and that's not acceptable. You know, we have to accelerate those calls to action, and what people who are watching the show or who are following the story have to do is get a copy of that TRC summary of the 94 calls to action. It's about 4 or 5 pages long, and read them. Like, just read those 94 calls. If you're inspired, then read the whole report. It's 6 volumes, mm-hmm. I believe. And that will give you a real understanding of what these survivors went through, their testimonies, the things that happened to them. And once you do that, then I would hope that people would then call the Prime Minister, their MPs, their MPPs, their MLAs, their mayors, their councillors, and say, hey, reconciliation is important. What are we doing about this? What are you doing about the 94 calls to action? You
talk about that pace of delivery, right? And we kind of had a big one with the Pope and everything this summer, but you're right, the 40-year period. I wonder, though, you talked about education, and I'll use the example again of my 2 boys going to school, wearing the orange shirt, learning about it, asking about it. That creates a momentum. right? I would hopefully think, maybe I'm naive on this, but the younger generation learning about it, understanding it, and for what it was. Do you take optimism from that the ingraining of this into the school curriculum and teaching people can create a momentum that can reduce that 40 years? I mean, do you take some hope from that?
The hope that I take from young people is that, as you said, they're learning something that their parents didn't know.
Right.
And so I was just in Regina. It was a big event. I think up to 18,000 were predicted to be there, a lot of them students. And so as I stood up there looking out at that sea of orange and looking at all those young faces, I thought, this is the future. You know, these young people will hear. They'll hear from survivors, they'll hear from me as a national leader, they'll hear from many people, and that memory will hopefully inspire them in some way to go, hey, I didn't know that, and now I have this new knowledge. What am I going to do with it as I get older, as I become a leader, as I become, you know, a part of the society that kind of runs the town or the city, the province, the country. And I hope that those moments are really impactful on the road to reconciliation, because I do believe that the next generation is the one who will accelerate and demand those changes and say, hey, you know, this seems wrong to me that thousands and thousands and thousands of children died in these institutions. That to me is wrong. That's an injustice. And so to me, young people they're not only the future, but they're the leaders today, I always say. So. Yeah,
well, they're the change agent, right? I mean, is where it comes from. But, you know, you talked about that moment, and we look at this day, and it's only the second official day. But there are a lot of days in between where we're actually talking about this in a way we never have it. Like, I'm 49, and I don't ever remember conversations like this happening on such a scale. And with politicians and actual decision makers dealing with it on a regular basis. I mean, what do you make of that change, really, in the last 5, 6, 7 years that we've kind of gotten to this point?
It is hopeful. I'm an eternal optimist.
Yeah. You need to be.
Yeah. And so, to me, the fact that we are moving forward is always hopeful. Of course, I know as an Indigenous person, as an Indigenous woman, that the road ahead is a long one, and that we have to accelerate. We have to move bigger and faster, because generations behind me are the majority. Like, the majority of our people are under the age of 30. Like, more than 50% of our population is under the age of 30. And I think about those young people, I think about those babies, those children behind me who deserve prosperity, who deserve peace, who deserve to be respected, who deserve safety, who deserve justice, who deserve equality and equity. That's what we're walking toward all the time. And the more we have allies across Canada to stand with us and walk that road with us, then the better this whole space becomes for all of us.
You mentioned this is about truth and reconciliation, and that you mentioned we need to get to truth. And for you, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to be acknowledging that it was genocide and just accepting that as the baseline of what we went through. Not we, but, you know, as a collective.
No, we did go through it. I mean, it was your side of the country that perpetrated that. So it wasn't just us.
Yeah,
that
fair
went
enough.
through it.
No, fair enough. Thank you. It seems like, based on your standard, we can get to truth. I don't know if we will, but that seems achievable. Can reconciliation ever be something that we look and say it's done? Or is it just need to be a continuous process? It seems like that needs to be a permanent state of existence. You know what I mean? Right? Like, even after, if all the TRC calls to action get done, we need to still continue on focusing on reconciliation. Is that how you see things?
Reconciliation is about our relationship.
Yeah.
So the relationship we have is lifelong, and it's multi-generational. And when you think about First Nations, we sign treaties with the Crown, as well as, in some cases, the Government of Canada, and provincial governments in some cases. And those treaties are forever. They're in perpetuity. It says that in the treaty. So I think that we have to see that this is a relationship, and that reconciliation is about bringing us back together to walk a good road together, and a road that is a healing path forward that goes on in perpetuity. Because it's not like suddenly, if you and I have a disagreement and then we reconcile. It's not like we don't talk to each other anymore. Like, that's what reconciliation is. It will go on forever.
On a last point, we now have a Justice of the Supreme Court and Justice Obonsawin, an Indigenous woman. Mary May Simon is Inuk. She is the Governor General of Canada. What do you think that signifies to the 50% of the population that is young, as you say, on a day like this, their appointments?
It really gives people hope. Like, we ran into Michelle Obonsawin, Justice Obonsawin, as we left, and I just felt, like many Indigenous women, I just had such a sense of respect for her that I see her as a shiro. That's what I like to call women that I look up to. And Mary Simon is also a shiro to me. And the more we show women in these roles, the more our girls see the possibilities of their lives, because sometimes the narrative is about MMIWG and violence against women. I mean, these are real issues that we have to address. At the same time, we have to show women and young girls that there's hope, that there is light in this world, there's somebody or something that they can look to.
Well, National Chief Archibald, thanks so much for coming in.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.